Important concept in economics is elasticity. And one of the most common areas that you will see that is in examining an individual supplier demand curve and evaluating the elasticity, how much supply and demand respond to changes in price, own price, the price of the good that's being supplied or demanded. So just to provide a definition first, so this is the Greek letter epsilon or E. So the price elasticity of demand is going to be defined as the percentage change in the quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in the price of that good. The elasticity of supply is a similar concept, which is looking at how sensitive the quantity supplied is, the percentage change in the quantity supplied for a given change in the price of this good. Now you can use a bit of algebra to rewrite these two definitions into the following. It's the change in quantity demanded compared to the change in price. This is basically the slope of a demand curve, multiplied times price over quantity. Elasticity of supply, change in the quantity supplied divided by the change in the price of the good, multiplied times price over Q. So this is just rewriting these basic elasticity definitions. But it is really about how sensitive, how much the quantity, the percentage change in the quantity demanded compared to the price, and vice versa for the supply curve. Now, it's probably most useful to discuss this in the context of a particular supply and demand relationship. So let's imagine that we've got some product for which there's a supply curve that relates the amount that firms are willing to supply with the price. The supply is a positive function of the price. The higher the price, the more supply will be brought to the market. Quantity demanded is 50 minus 3 times P. There's less demand if the price goes up. Now, I want to make very clear, this is really important, that the elasticity of a particular supplier demand curve is not identically equal to the slope. A lot of people make that mistake. They simply look at a supply curve that is downward sloping and say, well, if it's steep, it's elastic. If it's or inelastic, if it's flat, it's elastic. And that can be sometimes kind of a shorthand, but it's really not accurate because the percentage change in the quantity demanded or the quantity supplied depends on where you start. So in order to illustrate that, I want to calculate the elasticity of supply for two particular prices. So we've got elasticity of supply. We're going to use this definition. This is the change in quantity supplied for a change in price. So we come up here and look at the supply curve. That change is 5. Okay, that's this part. We're going to multiply times price over quantity. The price is 10. And what is the quantity supplied at that price? We plug it back into here. We're going to have 10 times 5, or 50, plus 10 is 60. So we have a final elasticity of 50 over 60, 5/6. If we take this same supply curve and put a different price in, we're going to get a different elasticity. Okay, it's the same basic relationship, but the percentage changes are different. So we've got a 5, which is again the change in quantity supplied over the change in price. That's the slope. We put price into here. We've got 5 plus 15. So we've got 1 over 15, or about or a third. So what you see is the elasticity changes as we move up or down the supply curve. Now you could do the same thing with the demand curve and you would have very much a similar kind of outcome. So what we want to do is to evaluate the elasticity of supply and elasticity of demand at typically the market equilibrium price. Now, for this particular supply and demand relationship, you can show that the price where supply equal to demand is 5, and the quantity that is supplied and demanded is 35. Okay, so that's by setting the quantity of supply and demand equal to each other, and then solving for the equilibrium price, plugging that back into the supply and demand relationships. So if we talk, for example, about the elasticity of demand, that's going to be using the slope of the demand curve, okay, minus 3, okay, that's change in quantity demanded compared to change in price, that's slope, and it's going to be price over 35, and what we are going to get using a calculator ahead of time is minus 0.43. Okay, that's the elasticity of demand right around the equilibrium price and quantity. The elasticity of supply is going to be done in a similar way. We will use the slope multiplied by 5 over 35, 25 over 35, or about 0.71. So one of the things that you notice about the elasticity of demand, it is going to be negative. That's because the slope of the demand curve is down. So you do indeed have a negative slope, and the elasticity of supply is going to be positive. You will typically have an increase in the quantity supplied if you increase the price. So here's an example of calculating the supply and demand curve, supply and demand elasticities. Now, a couple of definitional issues that when we talk about elasticities of demand, if the absolute value, so we're looking at the positive version of this, if the elasticity of demand is greater than 1, we say, by definition, that the demand curve is elastic. Now, maybe more technically, you would say it's more than unit elastic, but if it's greater than 1, we say it's elastic. If the demand curve elasticity at the equilibrium price and quantity is exactly equal to 1, that's unit elastic. If the absolute value of the elasticity of demand is less than 1, we say that it is inelastic. Okay, so these are definitions. So one of the things that you see here is that the elasticity of demand is really, whether it's inelastic or elastic, has to do with both the slope, but also the particular price and quantity where you're evaluating that elasticity. In a similar way, we can talk about the elasticity of supply. Now, we don't have to worry about the absolute value because we've got, it's a positive number. If that elasticity is greater than 1, the supply curve is called elastic. If that elasticity of supply is equal to 1, it's unit elastic. If it is less than 1, it is inelastic. Okay? Now, there are some special cases that you will run across, especially in international economics, where those elasticities take on particular numbers. In fact, let's think about where the elasticity of demand is infinite. Now, what that means is that the demand curve is a straight line. A small change in the price will cause an incredibly large, infinitesimally large change in the quantity demanded. Okay? We might have an elasticity of demand which is equal to 0. Now, another terminology that's sometimes used is we say here that the price elasticity of demand, or that the demand curve is infinitely elastic. Here it is perfectly inelastic. There is no change in the quantity demanded when the price goes up. The demand stays just where it is. And in the same way, if the elasticity of supply is infinite, it means that the supply curve is a straight line. Or if it is perfectly inelastic, that elasticity of supply is 0. You don't change the price or the quantity supplied at all with a change in the price. So this is a reminder about how elasticities are defined, calculated, and some of the definitions of how we characterize inelastic, elastic, supply and demand. And also these will be used in international economics a lot in the context of a small country. But that's for another day.